obscure storeroom in the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Cairo was where old, worn-out manuscripts were deposited and then lay untouched for centuries. Explore a medieval time capsule and learn why historians are so excited about a trash heap this week on Footnoting History. Hello, Footnoting History friends. It's Kristin, back with a little bit of Jewish history from Northern Africa, from the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Cairo. Before I begin, remember that if you'd like a captioned version of this episode, you can find it on our website, footnotinghistory.com, or on our YouTube channel. And while you're there, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd like to start by telling you about a trap that a lot of professional historians fall into. I know we're not perfect. It's crazy, right? We live and breathe history, even when we're taking time off and doing something that's not work. It's still somehow history related, and some people might even call that a problem, but I don't have a problem. You have a problem. Shut up. Okay, so we're like that. And sometimes we forget that not everyone is as immersed in all the things history like we are. For example, the other day I was talking to my husband about manuscript preservation, because that's what I do, and said something like, like in the Cairo Genizah, and continued on. I won't say that I was ranting, but I had a lot to say until I had to take a breath and was like, right? And he said, what the heck are you talking about? What is a Genizah? And I was kind of surprised because in my head, this was just something that everyone had heard about, like Versailles or the Taj Mahal. But of course, it's nothing like that for most people, even though the Cairo Genizah is, in my esteemed opinion, just as awesome as those things. It should have that recognition. It's incredible. You should absolutely know about it. And I'm going to tell you. First, I'm going to tell you what the heck a Genizah is. Then I'll tell you specifically about the Cairo Genizah and a little bit about what historians have learned from it and why it is the most amazing garbage pile ever. Okay, so technically a Genizah is a trash heap, but like a nice trash heap. The word Genizah is Hebrew for hiding place. It's a sectioned off room or repository, usually in a synagogue, where manuscripts or texts that have been worn out and would otherwise be totally repurposed or scrapped for parts or discarded are stored, because according to Jewish law, you can't just destroy or throw out something that has God's name on it. So you kind of just stash them away until you can give them a proper burial in a Jewish cemetery, eventually. It's kind of like that one closet that everyone has, the one where you cram things until you're going to deal with them later, you promise, until the closet is bursting. Yet somehow you can always find more space when guests are coming over to put more stuff in it. At least that's how I think of it. And yes, I have one of those closets. The plural of Genizah is genizot, so you sometimes hear these rooms described this way because although Cairo's is the most famous, it's not the only one. It is, however, the best preserved for reasons that we will get to in a second. The Cairo Genizah was technically originally in the city of Fustat, which was established as the new Islamic capital of Egypt in 643 CE in an area that had previously been ruled by the Byzantines. Stefan Reeve, who is the director of the Genizah Research Unit at Cambridge University, and whose book is linked in the further reading for this episode, does a great job of laying out the long history of the community and synagogue in a very clear and non-overwhelming way. But I will try to give you the highlights. Fustat was an important cultural, political, and economic capital for the new empire, and it was big, and it had an important suburb, Al-Qahira, or Cairo, that ultimately became more important. Today, these areas are essentially both modern Cairo, and Fustat is only 2 miles south of central Cairo, but back in the 7th century, they were distinct metropolitan areas, and as Cairo grew more important, Fustat declined, but Fustat was still religiously and economically relevant until about the 15th century. Jewish communities had lived in Egypt for a very long time prior to the advent of Islam. They were famously in Alexandria in the Greek and Roman periods, and they lived under Byzantine rule, and they were there in the 640s at the time of the Islamic invasion. But historians don't have a lot of detailed information about these Jewish communities until the early Fatimid period, which starts in 969 CE and goes to 1171. As things went, the Fatimids were pretty successful and somewhat religiously tolerant. They were looking to expand and consolidate, and they often kind of just let people do their own thing and didn't get in the way. And they were helped along by the political disintegration or upheaval or rearrangement of their Mediterranean neighbors. Italian city-states were replacing a lot of Byzantine areas, and the Fatimids didn't really have any real competition, except maybe a bit from the Seljuk Turks, at least at this time. This is not to say that the Fatimids were tolerant by modern standards. Jewish and Christian communities would always be second class, and there were episodes of violence and persecution, but there were definitely worse places to be in the medieval world, and under the Fatimids, there was a lot of Jewish immigration to Fustat and the surrounding areas in Egypt. This was not the case under the Mamluk rulers, who were in power from the 13th to the 16th centuries. They were much more hardline about ruling according to Islamic law, and there was a lot of persecution of religious minorities in Egypt. Jewish communities declined, and at one point, all of the synagogues were closed. In the 1440s, the Ben Ezra's Synagogue's bima, the raised platform where the Torah is read, was destroyed. Some community members were arrested, tortured, and forced to convert, and it was just bad until fortunes changed again and the Mamluks were out and the Ottomans were in the beginning of the 1500s, and many Jewish people who had been expelled by the Spanish and Portuguese found their way to Egypt. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for the Jews under Ottoman rule, and there was a lot of economic hardship and violence, and stuff isn't great. Life does improve under Napoleon in the 19th century, and as Egypt became an important modern capital, thanks in part to the Suez Canal in 1868, there were some upshots for Egyptian society as a whole. The Jewish population of Egypt was maybe around 4,000, and as Egypt grew demographically in the later 19th century, so too did the Jewish community, but there weren't a whole lot of Jews still living in Fustat at the end of the 19th century. But the Ben Ezra Synagogue remained a site that travelers wanted to see. All that is to say that the Jewish community of Fustat had a long history with many ups and downs, and the Ben Ezra Synagogue has pretty much seen them all. There are lots of legends about the site. It's where Pharaoh's daughter found Moses in the river. It's where Moses asked God to stop the plague of hail. Other Jewish prophets like Jeremiah and Ezra were believed to be there. Stefan Rafe says that, quote, contrary to an oft-cited opinion that you will find in a cursory Google search, the synagogue seems not originally to have been a church, but to have been purposefully built in the middle of the 10th century for a growing Jewish community. And there has been a synagogue there for 1,000 years, and it went by a few different names, the most popular now being Ben Ezra. And it gets that name because the synagogue once had a Torah scroll said to be written by the biblical scribe Ezra. Probably Ben Ezra was built on the foundations of an earlier community, but mostly you'll hear people talk about 1040 CE as the build date. Over its lifetime, Ben Ezra was an important, large, and wealthy community. It also was where the Jewish religious court, the Beit Din, sat. It was the center for social welfare since there were many wealthy members. They had a charitable foundation there, and it was where men went to study Torah and talk about Torah. So the Ben Ezra Synagogue's Genizah has 1,000 years worth of stuff kept in a city that was relatively important for a long period to various ruling dynasties, and that was relatively well preserved because of Cairo's dry climate. And here's the kicker. They weren't just putting sacred texts in their Genizah. They deposited, as Rafe puts it, quote, all forms of the written word, that people saw anything written in Hebrew or anything written by or about Jews and had a better safe than sorry attitude about preserving those documents. People were depositing the most stuff during the Fatimid period, after which things peter out, but still continued. For generations, people collected things from Jewish homes and institutions around Cairo for the Ben Ezra Synagogue, and that has left historians with just a trove of written material. All kinds of different things spanning hundreds and hundreds of years from this one area that is unmatched for medieval historians. You get official and professionally produced things, but you also get really ordinary stuff like receipts and household records and personal letters, stuff that usually was the first to go because it wasn't considered important at the time. And now it's all that ordinary stuff that historians want to know, but usually don't get to know. It is a garbage pile of historical gold. People talk about the discovery of the Genizah manuscripts in the 1890s like they were onto something totally new here, and they were and they weren't. The way I first read these 19th century writers, it sounded like some Indiana Jones adventure. A cracked mosaic reveals a sliver of light and then treasure, but there's a snake. My imagination mostly filled in those blanks, but there was a synagogue legend that a snake guarded the entrance to the Genizah, which was accessed through a small area in the women's gallery above the main sanctuary, and which was definitely not a secret. The Ben Ezra community, like many Orthodox Jewish communities today, had a separate area for men and women to worship, and women usually sit in a balcony up above. That's the women's gallery. Everyone knew the Genizah was there and that they were still depositing things into this hole, just maybe not European academics. And I'm not quite sure the Jewish people of Cairo knew what they had, at least not for some time. For sure, some 19th century scholars knew something was there. And in the second half of the 19th century, when Ben Ezra was trying to renovate their building, which was in kind of sad shape by then from time and hits of violence and neglect and fire, those scholars probably alerted the synagogue officials that maybe they could make a little money for their reno project if they sold some of that stuff in the Genizah. Some stuff made its way out between 1859 and 1872, but people were largely unimpressed with what they found in that early phase, or were just overwhelmed by the general state of things. Then things got a little more exciting between 1889 and 1892 when the synagogue was in full reconstruction mode, a period that Rafe quaintly calls, quote, manuscript relocation. Solomon Aaron Wertheimer, who was a rare books dealer based in Jerusalem, was the first person to buy a whole bunch of manuscripts from Ben Ezra in the early 1890s and do something exciting with them. It was kind of a research student's dream. Wertheimer found previously unknown midrashim, which is rabbinic literature that elaborates on the Torah and Jewish law, and literature from the Geonic period, which is late 6th through the 11th century CE, and published this stuff, which really made people sit up and pay attention. Wertheimer sold a bunch of manuscripts to Cambridge University and the Bodleian Library at Oxford, but it's really Solomon Schechter who takes the prize for being the guy who brought the Cairo Genizah to historians' attention. I always associate Solomon Schechter's name with a preschool that was named after him that a certain someone I know got kicked out of for talking too much and not paying attention to the teacher. It wasn't me. Solomon Schechter is a really important Jewish figure. He was a British-American rabbi and scholar, originally born in Moldavia, and he was the founder of the Jewish conservative movement in America. He taught at University College in London and Cambridge, and he moved to the United States in 1902, where he became the president of the Jewish Theological Seminary in America. He was a renowned scholar who had a lot of important contributions to Jewish history, not least of which was what he found in and later wrote about the Cairo Genizah. While Schechter was a scholar and teaching Talmudic studies and rabbinics at Cambridge University, he was intrigued by a manuscript fragment two Scottish sisters showed him. They bought it in Cairo and wanted him to look at it and tell them what it was. And what it was incredible. It was a fragment written in Hebrew of the Book of Ben Sirah, also known as Ecclesiasticus, and up to that point, people thought the only versions of this book to exist were in Greek and Latin. Holy crap, I assume Schechter thought. What other treasures may await in the Cairo Genizah? So off he went. When Schechter first got to Cairo in 1896, he buddied up to the chief rabbi of Ben Ezra, who was somehow persuaded to take Schechter to the Genizah, where he was given a ladder and carte blanche to take, quote, what and as much as I liked. A little easier said than done. The Genizah was not a pleasant place to study. There were lots of bugs. It was dark. It was not well ventilated. And his research assistants, who were the two sisters who showed him Ben Sira, were super grossed out and ended up taking stuff back to their hotel to try to clean off the manuscripts and dry them out rather than stay in that hole in the wall with Saul. In 1897, Schechter published a description of the Genizah in the London Times, and it's a little long, but there's really nothing like hearing his firsthand account, and I can't put it any better. Schechter talked about the Genizah as being, quote, a battlefield of books that after many centuries had their share in battle. Some of the belligerents have perished outright and are literally ground to dust in the terrible struggle for space, whilst others are squeezed into big, unshapely lumps which can no longer be separated without serious damage. In their present condition, these lumps sometimes afford curiously suggestive combinations, as for instance, a piece of some rationalistic work in which the very existence of either angels or demons is denied, clinging for its very life to an amulet, invoking these beings for a love charm. And the last lines of the amulet are mounted on some IOU or lease. And this in turn is squeezed into the sheets of an old moralistic who treats all attention to money affairs with scorn and indignation. Again, all these contradictory matters cleave tightly to some sheets from a very old Bible. And this is part of what I love most about this archive. It really highlights all the complexities and contradictions of a community over generations and across all aspects of society. There is a tendency for modern people to paint the people of the past with a broad or simplistic brush and forget all that could and did go on simultaneously. Yes, it really is exciting that a Hebrew version of Ben Sira survived all that time, and now we know about it. And there is a lot of other rabbinic literature in there too that helps us better understand the developments of Jewish religious thought in the Middle Ages, the contributions of professional Jewish scribes who produced texts that were becoming more consistent, and how the technical processes of making scrolls was evolving. You can see developments in the Jewish liturgy when people start introducing certain prayers and poems into their worship. You also see interactions between Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and some really interesting stories. There was one guy in the 12th century who was from an aristocratic Norman family in Italy, and his name was originally John Oppidan, and he was supposed to be a priest, but he wasn't feeling it. John Oppidan had a Jewish neshama, or soul, as they say, and he was so serious about converting that he circumcised himself. Ouch. And he bounced around a bit before landing in Aleppo, where a rabbi confirmed his conversion in 1113. From there, Obadiah Hager, formerly John Oppidan, went to Cairo, where he wrote music and poetry that was used in the Ben Ezra Synagogue, and also a short autobiography. And that's just an amazing story. I love the snippets of everyday life, and sometimes those come in the forms of little bits of conversation and sometimes reports of what people were out there in the real world doing. I love that we hear someone complaining about the price of stuff. Quote, God knows prices are so unpredictable these days, which sounds like a street interview on the modern evening news. There's also some delicious eavesdropping into people's marital drama. Quote, I promise my future wife that I will walk the straight and narrow and avoid the company of rotten people, some dude assured hundreds of years ago. Well, a lot of us sit here in the present and think, yeah, okay. One woman wrote to her absent husband that their baby boy was quite the handful. Quote, do not ask me what we suffer for him, she said. Crying, sleepless nights, so much so that the neighbors, God is my witness, are complaining. We incur great expenses for him, the doctor, the medicaments, and 2 chickens every day. And, girl, From over here in 2026, moms want to tell you that you're doing a great job and we hope you got some sleep. I have just barely scraped the top of the first layer of this wonderful, miraculous garbage heap of historical knowledge that is the Cairo Genizah. There is so much that I didn't get to tell you, and probably a lot that hasn't even been explored by historians yet. It's always incredibly exciting to unearth new sources of historical documents, but there's something almost magical about the echoes of the everyday and the exceptional from medieval Cairo and the Jewish community that lived there for hundreds of years. Today, the Jewish community of Cairo is pretty minuscule, but the Ben Ezra Synagogue survives, and it's part of the Egyptian government's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. It falls under the same umbrella as other Egyptian monuments, like the temples at Karnak and Luxor and Fatimid mosques and the old towers and walls of Cairo. You can see pictures of Ben Ezra as it looks today after a massive renovation project begun in 2021 on the Egyptian government's website, linked in the further reading, as well as some pictures that my uncle took on a trip a few years ago. You can still visit, though he tells me that you can only kind of see the entrance to the Genizah from below in the main sanctuary. There's a little black box opening, kind of like a window up in the women's gallery, and they let you walk around and see the beautiful Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, but they don't let you up into the balcony. So he didn't know if there was anything inside the Genizah anymore. I kind of doubt it, but from what we do know about what was inside, it's pretty incredible. What a happy accident of history. This has been Footnoting History. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If you like the podcast and you would like to help keep Footnoting History open access, please consider donating via our Patreon or Ko-Fi links on our website or by purchasing some of our merch. Thank you so much to those who already support us in so many ways. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe and tell all your other nerd friends. And remember, the best stories are in the footnotes.